worldly possessions of mine that survived two extensive searches by prison officials. I'm hoping that they haven't confiscated my books.
James is on a high at the moment. He's out of prison. He's come home. There's that whole surprise, that feeling of freedom.
In this bag, there'd probably be another bag.
When I first heard that James was arrested and charged with espionage, I probably laughed.
Dear James, Georgie, this is one of my nieces.
James would be the most hopeless spy. The idea of James being a spy is funny.
Australian filmmaker James Ricketson is facing 10 years in prison if he is found guilty of espionage.
Mr Ricketson was arrested last year after flying a drone above a political rally in Phnom Penh.
There was one stage where we thought he was going to die.
He looked like a caged lion. He was covered in sores and fleas and bed bugs. We realised this is a hellhole.
No evidence at all that I'm guilty of any crime. One of the things that my family did for me was put together little books of photographs. That's my son Jesse.
It's been a very long, hard, stressful, difficult road. I think for him, he's glad to be out of jail and just wants to kind of get on with it. But I don't feel, at least at this point, like I can just get on with it.
I'm so lucky to have a big extended family that actually care for me. Not everything that I said and did was to their liking, and sometimes pissed them off in the same way that they pissed me off.
There are people that were hurt, there are things that were said. He'll begin slowly to realise the ripple effect that none of us ever want to go through again, ever.
We've had a number of sort of book raisings and fundraisings to support this gentleman. Finally, he's out. Here's an opportunity for you to ask him questions about what it was like and why in the hell he was so stupid to get in there in the first place.
James is quite a divisive character in the sense that he's, I think he makes people uncomfortable because he is so passionate and he is so sort of morally motivated.
Let me begin, first of all, by thanking everybody here who sent a book to me in Presa prison.
He is a rather rose-tinted glasses idealist about what he can do to change the world in his well-meaning pursuits that don't necessarily take in all the consequences.
When you threw a drone over the opposition rally, were you aware this could be a problem?
I wasn't aware that it could be the problem that it became. No, not really. Not really.
How is that possible, James?
What?
How is it possible?
Well, I'm a slow learner.
I tend to think James is totally blinkered, and he just wasn't thinking. If you want to behave like that in Cambodia, you've got one hell of a recipe for trouble.
Dad has always been a rebellious maverick of a guy. That was just always normal to me. He was a great father, very attentive, loving dad, always up for fun and adventure and silliness.
I was in the inaugural year of the Australian Film and Television School with Phil Noyce and Jill Armstrong and Chris Noonan and other filmmakers. He's a high-wire walker from France. Yeah. He's one of the world's greatest. Yeah. What I love about filmmaking is the opportunity to immerse myself in worlds that are different from my own. Trespassing on the Harbour Bridge is an ordinance, not a law. Like a monument, you can't climb all over the monument in Martin Place today.
James's documentaries always had some sort of aspect of humanitarian content in them.
Just because you speak a different language and look a bit different, but you're still a human being.
I just thought, well, I am a very privileged person. I've gone to a private school. I've grown up in the eastern suburb of Sydney. And there are people much less fortunate than myself, and it just seemed natural to take an interest in those people.
I suppose he's got like this saviour complex in that he is definitely like saving people. And he does.
She calls herself Roxanne, but her real name is Elizabeth Lee Holmes. Her life has never been normal. Twice, she's tried to kill herself.
I was doing research for a documentary or a drama that I wanted to make about street kids.
The first time I met James, I was in a juvenile facility in Sydney because I just had an extremely traumatic childhood.
He's already got a 5-year-old son from a busted marriage, but he believes Roxanne needs a family life to help her go straight.
If Roxanne hadn't come to live with me, I think that ultimately she would have died.
He had no money himself. He had a sort of very much a sort of run-down house up at the Northern Beaches that he rented. And James took her on.
I started calling James Dad, my dad, from get-go, from the word go.
He never technically adopted her. She became my older sister, who was just completely wild and exciting.
My love affair with Cambodia began when I read an article about street kids in Phnom Penh. Because I'd had that experience with Roxanne, on a whim, I had a little bit of money at the time, I flew to Cambodia and made a little documentary. It never occurred to me, despite everything that I'd read about the sexual exploitation of children, that an adult man would wish to have sex with a girl as young as Shanti. And I was wrong. I met a young girl by the name of Shanti, who was a street kid.
The following year or something, he helped her in more significant ways, rented her and her mother a room, put her in school.
I think with James, he's full of compassion and empathy. He sort of builds relationships with the people that he films and the families, and the line kind of gets blurred. And I think with Shanti's case, it just disappeared.
4 babies.
4 babies now?
Yeah, 4 babies. Stop.
No more babies?
No.
How old are you now?
21.
As my relationship with Shanti grew, I documented it. What is the name of your baby?
Mr. James.
Mr. James.
Yes.
You called your baby Mr. James?
Yes.
It's about a young girl becoming the mother now to 9 children. And it's also about my relationship with the family.
He'd also help a whole bunch of other people. He's almost like a bit of a celebrity amongst all the street urchin characters around that area. So you'd walk down the strip there and everyone would be like, "Oh, Mr. James, oh, yeah, thank you."
James is an activist. He gets very passionate about causes.
When I discovered the world of blogging, I began to write some blogs which were asking questions of many, many different NGOs in Cambodia. Questions relating to their integrity, where their money was spent, to the ethics of taking children away from their families and so on. I've lost count of the number of letters that I've written, but it's in the dozens.
It's the way he goes about trying to achieve what he wants that sometimes, obviously, people haven't agreed with it. And it has got him into a little bit of trouble.
They've threatened to have me arrested. They've threatened to have me jailed.
Australian filmmaker James Ricketson has been given a 2-year suspended jail sentence by a Cambodian court for threatening to defame a refuge for girls.
I've now been accused of blackmail because I've blackmailed the church by saying to them, if you don't release the children, I'm going to publish all of our correspondence online.
I think James's biggest problem is that he's bloody-minded. He got into trouble once or twice with the law and it was quite public. He likes to argue and he likes to state his case and he's rather intimidating and he won't back down.
I don't see myself as an activist or as a provocateur. I just see myself as being an active member of the society of which I'm a part, often expressing opinions that other people don't agree with, which is fine.
It was well known that James had been making a documentary about Sam Rainsy, the leader of the Cambodian opposition party.
So, working even while traveling in the car.
So what are you looking at?
Facebook.
He had filmed at rallies before. Nobody had said anything to him. I don't think that James ever thought that his association with Sam Rainsy would be dangerous.
The Cambodian People's Party have been basically the only party that matters in Cambodia, and it's run by Hun Sen. And in 2013, the opposition Cambodian National Rescue Party became a serious threat. And what followed was a long-running series of violent protests, and people died.
On the 2nd of June 2017, there was a political rally at which tens of thousands, if not hundreds of thousands of people marched. This was a dramatic event that I actually wanted to film, and I just recently acquired a drone.
We said to him, do you think buying a drone is a very good idea? And he said, well, there's no law against it. And there wasn't.
The footage was terrific. And then the Cambodian National Rescue Party, which was then a legally constituted political party, asked me if I could give them some of the drone footage, so I did.
Why did you give the opposition party the drone footage that you'd shot?
Well,
surely that's untoward behaviour.
Well, that's an interesting question. I must confess that it didn't occur to me that it was untoward at the time. I was probably foolish to film with the drone, and then probably foolish to give the footage to the Cambodian National Rescue Party.
That's what really got under the skin of the authorities here. And it's not difficult to do that, but that's where, that was a big nail in his coffin.
The day after the rally that I'd filmed with the drone, I was sitting down by the river with Shanti. And as we're talking, I just noticed 12 policemen surround me. I was forcibly dragged from where I was sitting down by the river to a police car. I sustained various different wounds, and there's a good deal of blood, and subjected to then 6 days of interrogations.
In the course of investigating his use of the drone, somehow those charges morphed into something else and ultimately became the espionage charges.
For anybody who thinks that I may in fact have been a spy, the answer to that is categorically no, I was not. My job is simply to record what takes place in front of the camera and allow the audience to make up their minds about whether the person that's been interviewed is telling the truth or whether they're lying. It's up to the audience to figure that stuff out.
James was a pawn in a much larger chess match that was being played by Hun Sen. They wanted to use this to be able to eliminate any political opposition, and that's exactly what they did.
The political opposition was banned. Local journalists were also charged with treason, spying, simply because they were a threat to the ruling party and they were dreadfully paranoid about the elections this year.
I arrived at Presa prison There were 150 plus people in a 10 by 10 metre cell, and needless to say, I was shocked. So eventually I was able to lie down like a sardine in a can, in amongst all these people, and people's legs and arms and things are draped over you. So I was lying on my back thinking, boy, I've taken a bit too much of a risk here. The worst thing about those first weeks was getting scabies and made it difficult to sleep because your whole body is itching the whole night.
Dad had always been a loving and caring father, and I would just always help him if he needed it. And this was definitely a situation where he needed it.
Jesse and his partner Alex relocated to Phnom Penh. Jesse didn't consult us at all. We thought he was absolutely mad.
Even just the actual day-to-day reality of survival, he needed food and money and books. But then also beyond that, he needed us on the outside doing all that we could.
Jesse was a messenger, conduit for what was going on with James. I think Jesse was under a terrible amount of pressure, and at times overwhelming.
The Cambodian constitution guarantees freedom of speech, and I'd like to think that my Australian government would defend my right to freedom of speech also.
I was concerned about James's health. He had at that time suspected pneumonia.
My weight had gone down from 88 kilos to 69 kilos. I was very sick. I did feel as if I was dying on one particular day. There was a little bit of conflict that I had with my family, which was very difficult for me to deal with and difficult for them to deal with as well, because we had different ideas about what the best strategy was for dealing with my situation.
Do you listen to the government and go quietly and don't embarrass the Cambodians? Or do you make a bloody racket and shout from the rooftops that an injustice has been done?
See if we can find scenes where James was arrested.
The advice we got from DFAT and from other political sources was that, yes, they would work on James's behalf, that we were not to engage in a over-the-top media campaign because it looks like it's white Western power telling developing country how they should be running their legal system. That would get their backs up straight away.
I was prepared to go along with that for a few months, but then I began to get a bit antsy. I felt that as a taxpayer, there was a kind of a deal between me and the government. I pay my taxes, you protect my human and legal rights.
So where's the pharmacy there? I think DFAT realised primarily that there was no way in the world that no matter what they did, that James was going to get out of jail before the elections.
Don't push me! You don't need to push me. I felt that I'd basically been abandoned and that the Australian government was not going to come to my rescue in any sense at all.
I had many nights just thinking, what can I do to help my dad, help James?
I felt that the profile of my case needed to be raised, and so Roxanne helped me organise a Facebook campaign.
Although it went against the advice of family members, I thought, change.org, I've got to do it. I've got to reach the government because I felt like we were all having to remain silent.
And then gradually that segued into publishing the letters that I was writing to Malcolm Turnbull, to Julie Bishop and so on.
Roxanne collected 106,000 signatures to start berating the government about their lack of action.
We were worried that he could get a worse sentence if the situation wasn't kept under control and that James was too politically outspoken.
I guess the family became split and teams, and we all wanted the same thing. We all wanted to bring James home.
The situation put a lot of strain on the relationship between Roxanne and I. Literally, we had kind of choir of people all saying, you've got to stay quiet, respectful, playing into the Cambodian psyche and what matters to people here.
I could understand there would be frustrations by others back home wanting things to happen quicker. But there are times when people have to shut up, even if it hurts.
No evidence. No evidence at all that I'm guilty of any crime.
James became a very different person in prison. Very frustrated, very angry. So many times I would go into prison and we'd have a big kind of yelling fight and he'd storm out. I became that kind of point where he would release all of that angst. And so that became really hard.
There was always the question in our minds of, he's asking for something without the full view that we have that might not be beneficial to him. Do we act on it or do we not?
Ultimately, one person has to take responsibility for what happens next, and that person had to be me. I did not want decisions made by my family that turned out to be wrong and have them take responsibility or feel responsibility and think, oh God, if only we hadn't done X, Y, or Z. I wanted to take that responsibility onto myself.
The Foreign Minister, Julie Bishop, has expressed disappointment over the Cambodian election, saying it did not represent a free vote. The party of Prime Minister Hun Sen has claimed victory in yesterday's poll, which has been widely described as a sham.
It's about 2 weeks after Hun Sen was re-elected, and then suddenly the trial was up and running.
James Ricketson was charged with espionage. It's a crime that implies that he was spying for a foreign power.
I've been incarcerated for 14 months now, with no evidence at all presented to the court.
We don't believe that the evidence they presented was sufficient to even indict, much less convict.
The evidence hinged around a series of photos and emails. And the best they could do was produce these emails that said that, yeah, James has political sympathies aligned with the opposition.
Why would a spy be sending secret information, secret defence information, via a Gmail account? I mean, it made no sense at all.
Day number 3, and I still haven't been told which country I'm spying for.
If everyone just accepts, well, the system's corrupt and evidence doesn't matter, the truth doesn't matter, the facts don't matter, then it becomes a kind of a self-perpetuating cycle. And I wanted to break that, and I still want to break that.
I've still been presented with no evidence, and I still don't know what country I'm supposed to be spying for.
I do remember writing to him saying, I know you have every reason to be raging, but put a sock in it, just have a bit of humility.
Today is the last day of the trial. I'm hoping that the judges will discover the truth and set me free today, yes.
Well, the trial was an absolute farce, and I expect that the actual judgment was probably written well in advance before the final day when the verdict was announced.
When I heard the 6-year jail sentence, I remember turning round to Jesse and Alex and going, what this is ridiculous.
I feel so much for my father right now. He'd be feeling it really strongly, and who knows what comes next. It was devastating because it was that sense that this was just going to go on forever. Terrible for everyone orbiting around this situation, that we're all still kind of, imprisoned by it in our own way.
That the Australian government had allowed that to happen, I couldn't believe it, as along with everybody else. We couldn't believe it, really, that this was happening to this man who was so entirely innocent of the crime he'd been accused of.
Is there anything the Australian government can do, is planning on doing to help?
Foreign Minister Bishop at the time had made some direct approaches about that issue and represented Australia's view at that time. He can expect to get all the consular and other support from the Australian government you'd expect in these circumstances.
Providing consular assistance to an Australian in jail, in my experience, basically means that they bring you outdated newspapers, maybe a toothbrush, maybe a book. It means 15 months of being in a jail cell with 140 other men, getting scabies, getting sick, possibly dying in jail.
The message is that the softly, quietly diplomatic approach that the Australian government likes to take, is not only ethically compromised, but it's also, frankly, not effective.
Basically now, it's not a legal question anymore. It's not about politics. This is just a humanitarian issue. And we're just asking for mercy so that we can bring him home. We just need him home.
King's pardon was something that we'd always known about from the beginning as probably a last-ditch option if it really got to that point.
In order to apply for a King's pardon, you had to forego your chance to appeal. And that was very difficult for James to choose to do.
None of us know, even to this day, exactly what went on behind the scenes. But 3 weeks from the day of my being found guilty and sentenced to 6 years, the guards came to my cell at 5:30 in the afternoon and they said, the royal pardon has come through, you've got 10 minutes to pack your things and you're out of here.
The Australian filmmaker, jailed for spying in Cambodia, is due to arrive back in Sydney tonight.
I got to see Jesse and Alex very briefly on the day that I came back to Australia. There were lots of things that I would have liked to have said to Jesse and Alex that I haven't had a chance to say yet.
As much as it was a relief to see him, it was also very weird because everything was so bad as well. I had become the symbol of the blockage that was getting in his way of his kind of way of wanting to try and get himself out of jail. And so there was no appreciation, there was no gratefulness.
I'm very thankful to all of the people that helped me as much as they did. I love Jesse to death. Jesse loves me to death. He's very strong-willed. I'm very strong-willed. But we've got a very strong relationship, and I'm sure whatever problems that did arise between us over this past year will be resolved. Well, I mean, it's fantastic to be back in Australia. 48 hours ago, I was in a maximum security cell. So this is all a bit of a culture shock.
What's the first thing you're looking forward to now you're home?
A swim in the ocean.
G'day.
Hi.
How are you? Hey?
Oh, I was fine until a moment ago.
Oh, you're quite tall.
You've shrunk. It's old age.
Oh, mate, God, you can't talk.
I know.
Seeing him drive in and greeting him after so long, you forget immediately everything that's happened in the last, 2 years or so. You've lost so much weight. You're bony.
Well, I strongly recommend the Prasad diet. No alcohol, no cakes, no strawberries, none of these lovely things.
I don't think James has reflected on the impact it's had on his family.
So in your imaginations, you'd understandably think that the very worst thing could possibly happen to me.
I think he just wants to look at the positive. Just let bygones be bygones.
I don't have any regrets about pretty much anything in my life. But I think that the pressure on my family was worse than the pressure on me.
We didn't know how long this situation was going to go on for, and so we were bunkering down for the long term. So we just found a new house that we were moving into. The warmth of life is here now, so decided to stay. The reality of James having a family of 11, Shanti's family, that he's been looking after for all of this time, we inherited the responsibility.
So yeah, James now, he's good, he's happy. Not in jail anymore. Now he's with his birds in his house in Australia, lots of birds.
Jesse គាត់ល្អជាមួយខ្ញុំណាគាត់ជួយគាត់ស្រឡាញ់បងណាក្មួយគាត់ស្រឡាញ់ទាំងអស់គាត់អត់ចេះស្អប់ក្រពើមទេគាត់ស្រឡាញ់ទាំងអស់
They are family to us now, and
couldn't walk away if we wanted to. Care about them very much, you know, and want to make sure that we're always there to kind of help them.
បានជួបចែមនៅចាំតឡើយដល់មានកូនមកកណោអត់ឲ្យណយទិញផ្ទះទិញអីឲ្យទៀតគាត់អស់ច្រើនណាខ្ញុំអរគុណប៉ាច្រើនដែលជួយខ្ញុំអរគុណច្រើន
At the moment, it's difficult to get a definitive answer to the question of whether I can go back to Cambodia or not. I'd just like to be sure, if I go back, that I'm not going to be subjected to any further charges or imprisonment. And I want to go back and I want to continue being grandpa.
I don't think it's good for him to think about going back. He's got a lot to process and spend time with family and do a lot more personal healing. And as for his passport, I really would probably rip it up.
What I have to weigh up is the element of risk against the possibility of never seeing this little family that's been a part of my life for the last 22 years. It's not an easy choice.